Until Ms. McLaughlin gets here. We have a few board members who can't be here today. Both Ms. Darinette Koufax and Ms. Strauss are out of town. Mr. Stork is also out of town at a VACO meeting.
We have to sing for someone.
We have a birthday. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. So hang on just a second before we do that. So we will have 4 board members out this morning. Ms. McLaughlin will be here around 2. She's driving to Charlottesville for her son. Okay, Mr. McElvain, why don't you go ahead and get us started on the birthday?
Hey, Mr. Moon, you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
To you.
Okay, work session number 33. I call on Dr. Garza to start us off.
Yes, thank you very much. As you all know full well, we had to renegotiate a lease agreement that was coming to the end of its term this coming March. And due to the favorable conditions in the marketplace with regard to the availability of lots of office space, we were able to renegotiate this lease arrangement, I think, in a very sound way in terms of our fiscal management. We were able to move to establish a leasing arrangement in a facility that was much newer, in much better condition, with a lot better parking, with more square footage for the same, and make it budget neutral. It was a budget neutral situation. So all of that was good. And it's a long-term lease arrangement, which makes our employees very happy because they don't have to worry about every 3 years or 4 years or 5 years if they're going to have to move. So this is a 13-year arrangement. And it's also very close by. In fact, it's just right around the corner here. So in terms of the ability to facilitate work, I think, in a much better way, I think there's certainly some opportunities there. And we know what's going to happen down the road with 66. And so getting between here and the Ridge was going to be a challenge in the future. It certainly is oftentimes now a challenge. And then just the situation at the Ridge, the parking situation, some of it was just, it really gotten very difficult. So we're very happy about the direction we're headed. Our employees are happy with the direction we're headed with Willow Oaks. But we have professional development space at the Ridge that's used all the time. And in fact, it's very difficult oftentimes to get meeting space. So we have to provide at least the same amount of meeting space that we've currently had at the Ridge, because we have events and training and professional development meetings that are scheduled years out. So on the first floor of the Ridge, of the Willow Oaks, we will be establishing a design that will be conducive for professional development, including our principal meetings and some larger group meetings, and also to provide a space that can be broken up into smaller events as well. So that is going to happen. We have to have it because it's used all the time at the Ridge. It did also present the opportunity for us to relocate our board meetings should the board wish to do that. It would not be an auditorium style. It would be a flat room that would be just set up differently for an evening board meeting. Many school systems around the country are going to spaces like this, where it's, I think Loudon recently did the same thing, where it's meeting space most of the time, but it's just set up differently in the evenings if the board wants to meet over there. The reason I thought it was important for you all to have a say in this is because it won't be perfect in terms of ideal. Should we move our meeting spaces to Willow Oaks, it would allow Jackson Middle School to get their auditorium back because they do have to work around us. It does provide much more parking for our constituents because there's a nice parking facility there as well. So we did ask board members to join us this morning, should they have been able to do so, because the reason it's not perfect is because of the way the room itself is shaped. And there are also some large pillars that are permanent to the structure and cannot be moved around. So I think the question before the board today is, do you want us to take into consideration that you would want this room to be used sometimes for board meetings? And if the answer is yes to that, we'll take that into consideration as we move further with the design. If the answer is no, we'll keep doing what we're doing in terms of setting it up and designing it for professional development space. There is no additional cost to the school system either way. If you say don't do it, that's fine. If you say do it, there's no additional cost. The owner is paying for all of the updates and retrofitting of the building. This has all been taken into consideration, so that's not a factor. It's just whether or not you all want us to consider moving the space. So with that, I'm going to let Jeff and Kevin add anything I might have missed, but there could be, the location of a conference room adjacent to this large room for a closed session, and those kinds of things that we've typically been accustomed to having during our board meetings. So it's really up to this board one way or the other. The thing I would say, though, at the end of the day is we need some direction today, and the only reason is this. I don't have to tell the school board we're on a tight timeline for turnaround on this. We've talked about it on many occasions on the contract negotiations, and just it's a tight timeline. We have to have this building ready for occupancy in March and start to relocate hundreds of our employees to this particular facility. So the sooner we have guidance on this, the better. And I know Jeff and his team, but whatever the board wants to do, we're very happy to accommodate one way or the other. Jeff, Kevin, anything else you want to add before we open it up?
Absolutely not, Dr. Verza. You covered it perfectly. You covered every one of the tenets.
So I'm taking over as meeting manager now. So Mr. Moon, followed by Mrs. Smith.
I'm excited about the Willow Oaks location for us, having a rich move coming down to closer to Gatehouse. But this morning was the first time for me to be actually inside the building and see the physical space there on the first floor, where staff has been considering, for the board's consideration of moving our a board meeting location. That I was pretty excited about the possibility, but when I saw the actual space this morning, I have to vote with the current location at Luther Jackson. I know it's inconvenience to Luther Jackson, having a couple of evenings, sometimes maybe including public hearing could be 3 or maximum 4 times a month. That's an inconvenience to school. But if he decide to move, I want to be able to find a better physical space and layout for us to move if we decide to move, and I just don't see this place doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. Mrs. Smith.
I'm sorry I couldn't get there to see the space today, but my advocacy for a long time has been to change the layout of the board table. I don't think it's as conducive for the board to be in the shape that we're in to have meetings because you can't see each other. And I think dialogue is better when the board can see each other. So part of my advocacy for the board table has been to do more of a horseshoe. I know I won't be here to be part of that, but I think it's a much more valuable experience like we have here. You wouldn't want to be in a full circle. But I think as you go to configure space, I think it is valuable to be able to see each other's faces as we work together. And I can't provide feedback on the other piece that Mr. Moon said since I didn't see the space.
Okay, Mr. McElveen.
I would concur with Mr. Moon after having viewed the facility this morning. I think, like all of us, wanted this to work, but as Mr. Plattenberg put it, it's kind of like putting a square peg into a round hole. And I know Karen has put a lot of work into this, and I appreciate that. I just don't, unfortunately, think it's going to work.
Mrs. Schultz.
We're the teachers with the scissors and the glue sticks when I need them. So I've taken liberty in cutting up one of my missing colleagues' maps. I know, I feel very, very loud. I actually think that the location is great. I absolutely concur that it's not the best layout, but I also think that the raw product lends itself to some workarounds. And the one thing I want to be careful about is that we try to design the space for, the once in a blue moon, 400 people attending. The average attendance at a school board meeting is between 6 and 20. And I think we have to plan for what happens 99% of the time, not throw in the towel over what may happen 1% of the time. And the ability to go from a fixed auditorium seating to flexible chair seating allows us to flex the space, and the professional development space is needed anyway. So I think with a little bit of like looking at it from a different way, because there was definitely one layout that was favored, but I think rethinking that, I actually think the space could work. I don't disagree with Ms. Smith either that a slightly different configuration or a flexible configuration around the dais where it could be flexed, to bring it together into a more of a U shape may help. So I favor going forward and getting that space done, but with design changes. Yeah.
Mr. Velkoff and then Ms. Hines.
Mrs. Reed, my colleague from Springfield, knows quite well that one of those 1% occasions, we got a lot of pushback from the community that wasn't even able to get in the room, including my daughter. So I think we have to be able to take that into account.
Ms. Hines.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank Design and Construction and everybody for laying this out. And I know that there actually were several ideas considered before this one, was put on paper. And I also was kind of hopeful when I went over there today that maybe we can make this work. It'd be great to use this space, get out of Luther Jackson, give them back their auditorium. There's a lot to recommend it here. But for me, the bottom line question is this going to be an improvement over the space we have at Luther Jackson? And having walked it and seen those enormous columns, and then we did, try to imagine some other ways to do it while we were walking around, and there just doesn't seem to be a way to do it that is an improvement over what we have at Luther Jackson right now, just in terms of the space that we need as a board and the space that the community expects, for our meetings. There are just not good lines of sight in that room at all, and I would hate to have people show up and not be able to see all of us, or feel like when we're meeting, we have a huge column, right in front of us and cutting us off from the people in the room. So I think it's too bad. I really appreciate that we had a chance to think about it and look at it. But I guess my advocacy would be to stay where we are at Jackson and look for other opportunities maybe down the road.
Anybody who hasn't spoken yet? Ms. Evans?
Well, just a question. In terms of what you see, or Dr. Garza, what you see as the pros of going to Willow Oaks. I mean, I didn't go today. I went before, and had some of the same issues. But where are you seeing this is better than the space we're using now? What are the positives of that?
The reason I wanted you all to see this and for us to have this conversation is because, some of this is about managing expectations, right? It might be my perception that it's better than what we have. Someone described, well, this seems like, and I'm not sure if it was Jeff that said it or someone else, that this is like putting a round peg in a square hole. I think that is true. It's not perfect. We're not starting with a perfect rectangular, area in space. But I think what we're currently doing is also putting a round peg in a square hole. That's just my view. You know, the students perform behind us. We turn around, we're watching presentations. You know, the auditorium was built for middle school kids, so I don't know if you ever sat in the auditorium. It's pretty, I mean, I've sat in there when before I was, you know, in the process. That was 3 years ago, but it's kind of tight. So I do think, in terms of just the situation and it also does create a little bit, in my view, a challenge for the school because they have to work around that, and we do take some of their seating away from them because the dais is permanent. Now, with that said, the reason I felt like you needed to see this is it would be very different than what we currently have. It would be flat. It would not be an auditorium style. I think that in and of itself is unique and different. I think, you know, under an ideal circumstance, we would have much higher ceilings. The ceilings are configured, I think, to like 15 feet. Is that right, Kevin? 15 feet. I mean, it's still pretty high, but ordinarily under these circumstances, we would probably want something much higher. So that's a little unique. The setup, because you'll see it up there, the kind of the white area is what we have control over. That's our part of the building. And you'll see it's kind of a diamond, like a baseball diamond shape, right? And so that's not necessarily ideal, but I think, you know, we can fix it, you know, where it could be a nice space, you know, with screens that people could see. You know, the pillars, in my view, I wish we didn't have the columns because I do think those are an issue. But they're structural, so those cannot be changed. So we're happy to go either direction. I will tell you this, we will do, if the board says go this direction, we will make it conducive and a nice space for the board and the community to engage. But like I said, we just felt like this is an important decision that the board needed to tell us exactly what you want us to do.
The number of seats compared with what we've got now?
Yeah, this is approximately 390, and over at Luther Jackson,
I think it's what is it?
402.
400. So
So it's about the same.
Not that different.
No, and one of the things that Dr. Garza mentioned that provides the opportunities, you know, if you look in this facility right here, the ceilings that we have here are about 11 and a half feet right here. So you do get a little bit of additional height, but make no mistake about it. What you describe is the difference between auditorium style versus really standard conventional style. So when you go to conventions and hotels and things like that, a lot of the times you see smaller breakout rooms or large assembly rooms that are of the 15 height, unless it's a ballroom, or the 15-foot height. Now, what Loudoun County did, the reference to that, was when they designed that facility, the administrative facility that was designed specifically and bought for through the bond referendum and paid for by the community, was to specifically have the height built in, so it was the equivalent of ballroom height. Each of the points that are made, the custodial staff over at Luther Jackson talk about how much of a burden it is additionally for them to make sure that that space is clean and available. So there are pros and cons to the point. And when you look at it, you know, the columns do present a challenge. But again, it was designed as an office building, which it is. But in looking at it, both options provide pros and cons that you could sit and debate and describe throughout.
Yeah. Yeah, there are definitely pros and cons. I think the parking situation over there would be better for community members. It might be, once people learn where it is, it might be easier to get to. Where would, or have we thought this through, the performances, the Pledge of Allegiance, or the, the student performances, where would they take place in this configuration?
I think there are a couple of different options there. At least I think one or two board members maybe want us to kind of shift it over a little bit. And so we can look at some different configurations if the board wants us to move forward. But I think we could have designated areas for the student performances, whether that be a permanent stage area or that, not permanent, one that can be moved in and out when we need it. Mm-hmm. Or it could even be raised bleacher type configuration when that's needed. You'll remember we've had lots of different kinds of performances, so it could be brought in based upon what kind of performance we need, what kind of situation we need. So I think it would be over to the side, wherever the dais was put, it'd be over to one side or the other.
And last question, to Mrs. Smith's point, this is pretty much the same we have now, correct? It's no more of a horseshoe than what we have now, right? Isn't it pretty much the same? Okay. All right, thank you.
So, so where do you come down after all of that?
I don't have strong feelings. I see the pros and cons, frankly, of both of them. I'll go with whatever my colleagues prefer. I could teach it round or flat on this one.
Okay, I'll take my turn and then we'll do go-backs. Listening to the discussion and the presentation, I guess I'm wondering what the real problem is that we're solving. Like, how bad is it at Luther Jackson? And what would we be gaining by moving? I appreciate the information. I haven't seen the space, but it seems to me generally the space that we have at Jackson works pretty well. So I guess I'm not convinced that we need to move, and I also worry about the public perception issue. So now go backs. Ms. Schultz.
So the one thing about the needing additional space is with unfixed chairs, we could, I'm imagining, put more people in. When you have fixed chairs, there's only so many seats for people. And the great thing about having flexible space with flexible chairs is that if it is a meeting with more people, we could put more people in. And could there not be, doesn't this lend itself potentially a little bit better to having some video panels at the back of the room, Mr. Plattenberg?
Yeah, with the columns, we definitely could put some type of projection or screen or something like that so the members of the audience could actually see that.
So, I kind of like the idea that there's a natural flow over, because the fixed auditorium chairs that you were talking about, Dr. Garza, there's either a seat for you to climb over somebody to get into a spot or there's not. And this way, that gives us a little bit of flexibility. And I do see our impingement on a school as part of the issue, if you will, Ms. Reed, that we're trying to solve, is how if we can unbundle a burden on a school and it not cost the taxpayer anything, I think that's a good reason to do it. Even if it's not perfect. It's not about being perfect for us, it's about being acceptable. We're not a corporation that's out there, trying to do a gold standard of what's perfection. It's quote unquote good enough for government, so.
Okay, I have Mr. Press, then Mr. Velkoff.
I think my take on this whole issue is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I personally have no issue, and I've heard no issue from any prior student representative or any students who might have been in the audience about that space. So I think this is an interesting proposal. I think us keeping it to its primary purpose as a conference and professional development space is what we should focus on. I feel pretty strongly that Luther Jackson is a good option, and kind of from a philosophical point of view, it reminds us why we're all doing the work that we're doing. We're in a school, which I think is it might seem like a small thing, but it seems in the grand scheme of things, I think it's a statement about what we're about if we're meeting in an office building versus meeting in a school. I would ask regarding this facility, do we have the same audio-visual capabilities regarding the recording, taping of meetings, and microphones and whatnot in that space?
Yeah, part of our review was to go ahead and provide the exact to be able to broadcast over the television network as well. So yes, and we've worked with DIT to develop that requirement.
For individuals who weren't able to go these last two times we've had walkthroughs, it's a shell space is what we're looking at. Literally concrete, open, it's shell. So we have to do something to it. So anything we want to do is perfectly fine, whether we keep it as professional development space. It did present an opportunity for this consideration, and we just felt like this needed to be a decision the board made.
Okay, I have Mr. Velkoff, then Mrs. Smith, and let's hope that we can come to some decision point where we can give some feedback, because right now it's kind of a mixed bag. I'm not sure what direction we're giving people, so hopefully we can solidify on that. Mr. Velkoff.
Yeah, I have a quick question for Mr. Plattenberg and then a brief comment. So, Mr. Plattenberg, in either case, the capacity is not set by the number of chairs in the room, it's set by the fire marshal, is that correct?
Yes, it is, and it's based upon the ability to have people within the space.
Right, okay. So I'm going to throw my piece of spaghetti on the wall for everybody, and that is, no matter what happens, I think it'd be great if the Sprague Center could be moved. If we go here, that's great. The reason I say that is, with all, love and kindness towards all of you, I just hate having to sit through all of your board matters every meeting, and I wish we could come in and record those, right, and then have them play on Channel 1. And if the video equipment were available and convenient, members could come in, they could record that statement. And instead of taking up time at the board table, it would be still available as it already is to the public. So that's my 2 cents. We'll see if the spaghetti sticks on the wall.
Mrs. Smith.
I'm a firm believer that it's smart to use space flexibly, because I think that that's important in being good fiscal stewards. And I feel bad I couldn't be there today. So, understanding the columns and those issues. Is there any thought that as we transition to having the other space, that there would be a way to put the board meeting room in this building? Or is that just something that would be too expensive and not work? The connection between the school board offices here, to have everything in one place would make sense. I just don't know if that's cost prohibitive, or if there's a space, or how you could combine between the two buildings, and if that would make sense at all.
I'm not sure that we have a space here at Gay. We'd have to completely change the configuration. Isn't that right, Jeff and Kevin?
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's possible, but
Yeah, in fact, it would be really what we have is the cafeteria. And that space
that's not big enough.
And it's open, but it could be, but you'd have to modify the actual physical circulation within the serving area. Yeah, and the pillars that are in there are kind of on the sides, but they're there.
Any other comments or issues to raise regarding this?
I think we'd still have some column challenges here too, wouldn't we? Because I know the cafe has columns. A lot of these big office spaces, unfortunately, are going to have these structural columns in place, but we've not entertained that. It's an interesting idea.
I didn't know if you look at the whole first floor area, and if you've got the two buildings, and if you're moving anything around, if anything made sense. But anyway, for what it's worth.
Anyone else? So one more time for me, I would say that I'm hearing a desire for more flexible space. I'm hearing a desire to be able to accommodate more people for those rare occasions when we do have a lot of citizens who want to attend. I'm hearing that this particular space has some challenges associated with pillars, but yet it offers more parking. I'm also hearing comments about the use of a school being both a positive and a negative, depending on how you look at it. But again, I guess ultimately for me, I'm still trying to understand, is this a solution looking for a problem? What is it about Luther Jackson that is kind of forcing us to be looking at this option? And if, in fact, it is some of those things I just ticked off, then it seems to me like we're trying to force fit a solution that maybe isn't perfect. But so in the end, is it better? Is it a net improvement for making the move, I guess is what I'm saying, and maybe Dr. Garza can address that.
We're not looking for problems. We have plenty of problems that we have. As I stated earlier, this was just an opportunity We do have to configure it as professional development space. The owner's paying for it, so it just presented opportunity. We thought it was at least worthy of the consideration or the question. You know, if the board would prefer that we keep it the way it is, that's perfectly fine with us, and we'll move on down the road and do what we're doing. So we're not trying to solve problems that maybe don't exist, but we certainly felt like it was important for you all to tell us what you wanted us to do.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask for a sense of the board then, and you have to vote. So those of you who were kind of kind of in the middle, we're going to force you because from my tally, it's going to be very difficult to have a sense of the board on where we are. So how many folks feel like, yes, we should move to accommodate the board at this new space? Raise your hand. How many folks feel that we should stay at Luther Jackson? And who's not voting? Okay, so the question for Dr. Garza and staff, is this enough of input? Ms. Hines?
Well, no, I'm sorry, I was just looking. So we had 4 against, 2 for, and then we had 2 people abstaining. And how many people do we have here today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? But I mean, if this is something where, there's a proposal that we move forward and we don't have sufficient support to move forward,
One more thing I could put on the table. We have a 13-year lease. You know, we could always say, let's do what we're doing. And then 2 years from now, if you all say, hey, let's go over there, we could work it out then. Is that correct? See, these are guys at the end of the table
Absolutely.
that could do that. I mean, it would make it easier knowing at the front end if we want to do it, but certainly we could accommodate down the road if we need to. So that's an option too. This is not a forever done, never could happen kind of deal.
Ms. Evans?
Well, that does help. I mean, I think staying where we are is, first of all, I guess it doesn't cost anything to stay where we are for the time being, and perhaps we revisit this. I mean, I understand that it would be more efficient to do it now if we were going to do it, but with all of this hesitation on the part of board members, I don't see us moving forward on it with this much hesitation.
Okay. My last comment would be that it also might be helpful to have some of the new board members weighing in on how they want to use that space.
My only caveat to that is it can't be decided in January. Because we're kind of past the point of no return. You all know our timeline is aggressive because we do not want to be in a position where we're having to pay our current lease. We're having to extend our current lease because they will kill us on the rental cost. So we can't do that. What I was suggesting is if the board wanted to reconsider it, a couple of years down, let's get everyone moved then first, and then potentially reconsider it in the future. Right. So to me, if we don't decide now, it's going to have to at least wait until we get everyone moved and relocated. Does that make sense?
Mrs. Ray,
Mr. Moon?
From this board member's perspective, there isn't really a strong support for moving the board meeting to this new location. So if board in the future may want to consider that again, but there will be in the future. For today's purposes, I think we can safely say that there isn't enough support to move.
Agreed. Yes. Mrs. Schultz.
I'm sorry, 4 board members out of 12 having an indication when we barely have quorum, I don't think is a clear indication of anything. And I totally get, Dr. Garza, that you have a schedule to keep, but to say that 1/3 of the board who happens to be present can decide this, and this is an unrecoverable decision. I mean, if we do this, you're stuck for years. And the question is, if you've got the opportunity to do it and you don't take that opportunity, then that opportunity, you've lost that moment in time. And so you know, we're saying we don't want to look at any additional drawings or concepts based on any feedback from today. I mean, we saw it one time, not everybody even in this room saw it, and we saw it for 20 minutes, and there's potentially other manifestations of these seating arrangements. So I think that this is a very a swift decision that is highly permanent, and to go off of 4 board members, I think is potentially a dangerous precedent if we have the ability to get a little bit more feedback from the people who weren't able to go today.
Anybody have any comments or any response to that? Ms. Hines?
Would there be any value in taking another vote? I don't know, I'm just asking.
Ms. Evans?
Will there be more board members on the 12th, and would the 12th make a difference? I mean, could we make the decision on the 12th and still be in whatever timeline we needed?
I mean, the 12th is just a few days away. Certainly, we could take it up yet again then, but I would say that would be it.
I mean, I
If you
think
wanted to
we
do
will
that.
have at least, will we have 3 more board members on the 12th? Tammy's still gone? Okay. So, but we would have Janie and Megan
And
here.
Megan.
And I guess we could, but I mean, I hate to put it off because I know you want a decision today, but would that make sense to?
All right, let me,
have a final?
I feel a little bit like we're expanding our discussion because we have some time. But let me ask first, for the sense of the board here, how many folks would entertain delaying this discussion further until the 12th so that more board members could participate? Who would support that? Raise your hand. 2, 3. Who would not support that? Raise your hand. Okay, so that is not going forward as an option.
We'll move forward with our design for PD space then.
It seems clear to me that, again, the sense of the board, the people who are here, we do have a quorum, is that we don't want to move forward at this time. So thank you very much. I do want to also take this opportunity to welcome 2 newly elected board members, Jeanette Huff and Karen Corbett Sanders. Okay, this portion of the work session is adjourned. We are ahead of schedule. How about that?
Do you want to just do it all, or do you can do it?